Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Delighted to have Aiden back in the Practical Jung series. So Aiden, what are we doing today?
Thanks, Shrikant, and thanks everyone for being here today. Today, the topic is how to handle situations and people that annoy us, which is sort of a conversational way of talking about this Jungian idea of projection, and maybe more specifically, shadow work, what often is talked about in analytical psychology as shadow work. So today I'm going to sort of break it into two sections. And the first half, I'm going to talk a little bit about projection, a little bit about my personal entry point into this topic, and discuss this idea in general. And then the second half, I'm going to be sharing a tool. In my 10 years of exploring Jungian psychology and various other frameworks, this is perhaps the best tool that I've found to enter into doing shadow work and enter into facing these kinds of situations where people are causing a lot of annoyance or frustration. It's a wonderful tool for sort of handling that through a depth psychology lens. So first half, we'll talk about the concept of projection and shadow work. And then the second half, I'll give an actual tool. And there'll be a pause between the two, by the way, just for clarification questions and such things before we go to the tool itself. So where I wanted to start today is that, this is my second career, my career as a Jungian thinker, as a Jungian expert, and currently I work as a coach and advisor within a Jungian framework. But my first career was as a musician. And one of the places I first encountered from experience this idea of shadow or projection, which I'll explain technically what these things mean as we go. But one of the first places I really encountered it was I had realized that my career as a musician was not really working anymore, and I was looking for a second career. And one of the options I explored was as a music therapist. And I went, as I was exploring several career options, I went and shadowed a music therapist in New York and had an incredible experience. I'm going to share my screen. What do I have to do to I may have to be the co-host.
You are the co-host. So go ahead and type.
Oh, perfect.
Click on share screen. Yeah.
There we go. Here we go. So thank you. So I had this incredible experience where I was shadowing, pun not particularly intended, a music therapist in New York City. And one of her gigs was to work at this life skills school. And so she would work with developmentally delayed children, kindergarten to 6th grade, I believe, and bring music therapy into this organization. And I had this wonderful opportunity to go with her, and I improvised music with these kids, and I witnessed the impact of music on their thinking and their communication, which sometimes was severely underdeveloped. And one of the rooms we went into, children, 7, 8 years old, 7, 8 or 9 years old, we went into one of these rooms, and all we brought in was a keyboard. We brought in a keyboard, and one at a time, the kids came up to the keyboard and got to improvise on it. Just basically play music, improvised music. None of them were trained piano players. And here's what was so fascinating about this. Every single kid walked up to this instrument, the same number of keys, the same sounds. It was in effect the exact same instrument. And no two of them approached it the same way. As untrained pianists, each one had their own way of exploring this instrument. I remember one kid played the bottom key and then the high key. That was his sort of start. One kid only wanted to play the black keys, and they would kind of sweep up and down the black keys. One kid wanted to play two adjacent notes, like two white notes right next to each other, just back and forth. One kid was sort of random and kind of hitting the keys. One kid had like one cluster of notes up here and one cluster down here and was going back and forth, but none of them were the same. And the sounds they produced were so different. And it kind of struck me as a lesson that now I have more information about, but even at that time, it struck me how interesting that people can come into the same environment in this situation, namely, we're talking about a keyboard, and explore it and its capacities in such different ways, and emphasize such different things like highness versus lowness, the black keys versus the white keys, keys that are close versus keys that are far. I mean, these kinds of things are organizing the kid's behavior and the interaction with this environment, this keyboard. But what provokes that is something within themselves. It's not the keyboard itself. It's what's provoked those differences. What's being emphasized and de-emphasized and explored is provoked by the insides of those children. There's no direction given as to how to approach the keyboard. So you kind of see how people can enter into a new space where they're not familiar, and their own leanings and impulses will color the environment. It helps in this case that none of them were trained, so they didn't have a trained reference. It's even more so that it comes from within them. It's not about lessons that they've had. And so to them, it was this blank canvas of sorts. And this is, in essence, in sort of a creative way, it's how we approach everything that is still mysterious to us. We approach a mysterious thing in ways that say much more about us than the actual object in front of us. I'm just going to read what I said. I might be repeating a little bit of myself, so I apologize for that. But each child's strategy in their experimenting with the piano said as much about their living interest and their curiosity than about the instrument itself, right? And there was this distinction: high, low, black keys, white keys, adjacent keys, random, etc. So when we approach something new, we express our inner world through that new thing, and namely what we have the most interest in about it, or where we feel the most playful about it. And the interesting thing in our conversation today, where this is topical, is that what is at the foreground and the background of our curiosity or our interest about the new object, that becomes a psychological question. What do we emphasize or de-emphasize? What do we leave out of the exploration entirely? And the very interesting thing is that these kinds of questions are not only there to help us understand the world, but to know ourselves through our interaction with the world. You see, it's actually a window into self-exploration through interaction with the world. And part of what we're going to be talking about today is when we start to get very objective about the world in front of us, then we can start to see how we are coloring that world through our own subjective lens. So again, if you think about the children playing the piano, if we got into conversations with them, it would be very interesting to know why each one approached it the way that they did. And that because it was the same piano, you could learn some about why each one approached it totally differently. Perhaps they could even partially explain it, I don't know. But the world for us is something like this piano. Every relationship, right? Every boss, every challenge, every condition really is an opportunity to get clear. What am I putting in the foreground of this situation? What am I putting in the background? And what am I omitting entirely? It's always a chance to see what's different about my approach versus what's really in front of me. So that kind of takes us into the conversation today. Funnily enough, I started with music because I was going to play a song at the beginning, and it got me thinking about music. But even though we didn't play music at the front, this idea still stands, that it was one of my entry points into this conversation. And so this is how I like to think of it today, having done a decade now of exploration in Jungian psychology. I like to think of it like this. Each of us has two lenses from which we are operating at all times. This is a psychological metaphor, or it's a metaphor that speaks to a psychological fact, okay? So we each have two lenses from which we are operating at all times, a camera lens and a projector lens. So from the metaphorical camera lens, we take things in. And the camera lens is the lens through which we think we are simply capturing what is in front of us. You know, when you point the camera at something and you take the picture, you have a sense that you're capturing what's really there. You're capturing reality as it really is. You just take a snapshot and that's reality, right? That's sort of the camera lens. And we all walk around with that. On the other hand, very pertinent to our conversation today, we have a projector lens as well, which is the lens through which we project what's going on inside of us onto the screen of our outer lives, just like a projector. And it's literally, you know, it's like a movie. There's a film inside of the film projector, and it projects out the figures and the stories inside of it onto a screen. If you think about going to a movie, like the movie theater, for example, old school, I mean, I think today is more digital, but old school, there was film, stock film, printed with a film, projected through the projector onto the screen. And we all watch it in the theater like it's really happening on the screen. The drama and the story and the experience, it's as if it's originating from the screen. But it's actually coming from the film projector. That's the source, right? So that's kind of the very important point that I want to correlate with the keyboard as well. It's like we see the primary source indirectly when we get into the projection lens. We see the primary source indirectly through the screen. So the images and dramas and stories that are captured in the film, these are latent images. If you go and you look at film, stock film, and it's been printed on the film, you can see all the images and you can see what's been printed on there, and it's all kind of there, but it's latent and there's no life going about it that way. In fact, I'll give you an example. I set this up so you can kind of see experientially what I mean by this. It's like, here's a film, right, with two dogs, for example. You could say this is like a 15-minute film, right? And if you go and you just string through the series of images, it's kind of cute. And you can see how, you know, a little bit how the story unfolds and these kinds of things, but it doesn't have the same wallop or the same impact if you were to play something onto the screen, particularly to add sound and particularly to add the music, and suddenly it's an experience that is coming from this source. It's coming from this source, but what's given life and it's experienced with life fullness is when it gets projected onto the screen. And we all can relate to that experience because that's why we go to the movies and such things. So our world can become a bit like that screen. That's the point with the projector lens. Our partner can become like that screen. Our children can become like that screen. Our boss, our parents, politicians can become that screen. Institutions can become that screen, or the world at large, where inner images, and Jung uses the word image a lot, inner images that have been established, you know, quite early in life, and perhaps even through archetypal images, are playing out on the screen of our lives. It's a very Jungian idea, and it's not, you know, sort of the regular frame of reference. But from the Jungian point of view, you could say this world literally becomes this screen that takes these inner images, parental images, God images, images of value, images of attraction, images of repulsion, and puts that out onto the screen of the world so that we experience these inner images indirectly, not in ourselves directly, but through our experience of the screen of our lives. And this is a very Jungian idea. And here's the rub about that. Because we have these two lenses, it becomes a matter of keeping track, right? In any sort of experience we encounter in our lives, it becomes a matter of keeping track. What's going on here that's from the projector lens, a past experience that I'm playing out here, early life experience that I'm playing out here. And this, by the way, is not particularly Jungian. There's attachment theory, there's object relations theory, there's all kinds of early life frameworks that you could say speak to this idea, where the current circumstance is very colored by those experiences. But the rub here that I'm bringing up is, how do I measure that or temper that in terms of realizing that's coming from inside of me, versus kind of fooling myself into thinking that I'm really seeing things as they are. That's the distinction. Am I seeing this as it is, or how much am I coloring it? And our task is to be very cautious and aware that the projector lens is always operating, so that we don't think we are only seeing through our camera lens, as if it is what it is. And the projecting lens is always emphasizing things, de-emphasizing things, adding value, intensity to things, omitting things, and like I said previously, placing lived dramas onto our current lives. So Jung has two great sentiments that relate to these ideas in terms of relationships specifically, and this brings it into the topic today, the matter of annoyance, that people who annoy us are actually an opportunity to better understand ourselves. We look at those situations where it's an exaggerated level of annoyance, what somebody is doing, that we could say, my emphasis, the charge of my experience of annoyingness, is it really like on par with what this actual activity is or behavior is? If somebody doesn't do the dishes, it's sort of like, if I'm really annoyed about that, as opposed to, you might even say, the appropriate level of frustration, then I could say, this situation speaks as much about my annoyance as it does about the outer circumstance. So again, Jung would say that people who annoy us, or circumstances that annoy us, are an opportunity to better understand ourselves in this way. And secondarily, that the mechanism of projection turns the world into our unknown face. So that's where we get into this place of what is my value intensity? What is my inner world bringing to this emotionally or story-wise, that is really coming from in me, as much as, in other words, the projection lens, as much as what's really going on, in other words, the camera lens. So I'll talk a little bit about projection too, so we are on the same page about it. Projection is the psychological term that's used in Jungian psychology, that's very relevant to the shadow work, in the sense that shadow work could be expressed as withdrawing projections. Could be expressed as withdrawing projections. That's what shadow work is. And what projection means etymologically is to throw forth, right, or thrown forward. So in the word itself, it's this idea, you take something inside of yourself and you throw it outward onto people and circumstances. That's the basic idea etymologically. And Jung puts it this way: just as we tend to assume the world is as we see it, think camera lens, we naively assume that people are as we imagine them to be, think projector lens. In this latter case, unfortunately, there's no scientific test that would prove the discrepancy between perception and reality. Although the possibility of gross deception is infinitely greater here, meaning in relationships, than in our perception of the physical world, we still go on naively projecting our own psychology into our fellow human beings. And in this way, everyone creates for themselves a series of more or less imaginary relationships based essentially on projection. So that's a very heavy thing to say. From a Jungian framework, we can always say, how much of this is an imaginary relationship, meaning based on I'm carrying the image that you have of me, and you're carrying the image that I have of you. It's imaginal, it's imaginary, versus me really having an encounter of you as an individual, and you having an encounter with me as an individual. In a Jungian framework, relationships are sort of like a long form withdrawal of projection, so that you can say, oh, you're not who I thought you were, but now I know more about who you really are, and now we have a relationship, right? And vice versa. If I have an imagination, if I have in my imagination the way that a partner is supposed to act, for example, and they're even able to carry that image for a long time. They're supposed to be like this. I think they're supposed to act like this. I think they're supposed to respond like this or dress like this, or I could have all kinds of ideas about it. As long as they're in alignment with that, you could say, I'm as much relating to my idea, my image of what partnership should look like, as I'm relating to that actual other person. But as I start to see they have differences that deviate from my image of how a partner should be, then I have to realize, oh, they're not just my image of partnership, they're my partner. And I take a little bit of my image back, and I realize, oh, I can either get frustrated by that essentially, or curious who's the person on the other side of this image that I'm carrying. Jung would say that's where relationships really happen, when we take the projection back. But until then, we're kind of making these imaginary relationships. And I wanted to note here, it's important to say that projections can either be positive or negative. So I kind of touched on this with this idea of partnership, but in the definition of projection, the idea is we attribute to somebody else or to a circumstance a part of our own psychology. And it's a part of our own psychology that we disavow. We do not have a relationship with it. It's in our psychology, but it's in the unconscious. That's what makes it basically ammunition for projection. The reason that I'm able to play it out onto other people is because I haven't integrated it in my psychology. And because it's unconscious, I project it onto others. So that's why the screen idea is the realization that it's some of the components are coming from inside of me, but not on purpose. That's what I'm trying to add. Projection is never intentional. It's because it's something that I'm unconscious of. And that's why it gets projected. That's why I meet it in you. If I was conscious of it, I wouldn't have to project it onto you, for example. That being said, they can be positive or negative. We have a tendency to focus on the negative ones. So for example, if I think someone is weak, if I meet somebody and I think they're too weak, and this judgment of mine is felt with a lot of emotional conviction, it's very likely that I'm projecting onto them my hate of my own weakness. That's the catch. If I strongly am annoyed, dislike, hate the weakness of somebody else, and it's felt with like an emotional wallop, it's possible, at least, if not very likely, that I'm projecting my own dislike of the aspects of me that it might be conceived of as weak, because I haven't dealt with them. Now I'm dealing with them in relationship with you. So to withdraw the projection, I would have to face where weakness exists in me, this thing that I dislike, right? And I'd have to see where it's in my own psychology and not just in others. That's a negative example. On the other hand, if I adore, for example, somebody's stunning intelligence, and there's sort of like a rapturous or exaggerated emotional component, same thing. If the intensity is sort of a state of awe or exaggeration, then it's very possible that I'm projecting a sort of component of my own intelligence, if not my sort of latent intelligence, with which I'm not well acquainted yet. I'm unconscious of it, so I encounter it in someone else. So projections can be positive or negative. the late analyst von Franz picked up on the above Jung quote about imaginary relationships and went on with this idea. And she said, in these imaginary relationships, the other person becomes an image. Although all the contents of the unconscious are in this fashion projected onto the environment, we can recognize them as projections only when we gain enough insight to see that they are images of peculiarities that are a part of our own makeup. Otherwise, we are naively convinced that these peculiarities really belong to the other person. So for something to technically be a projection, we have to be at least ready to investigate how much the other person corresponds with our image of them. If there's no desire to do that, or energy behind the investigation or the curiosity, then we would just attribute that quality to them without reflecting about it. You see, it wouldn't be a projection, so to speak, psychologically. It would just be, we are just attributing it. Their weakness, for example, we're just saying we don't like their weakness and they're weak. And that's sort of the end of that discussion. And then all we can do is manage the relationship and the emotions. Can't do anything. But on the other hand, if we say we want to investigate if there is a discrepancy between the person and our image of them, then we can technically talk about a projection. So the idea of projections necessitates a preliminary curiosity, a desire to see the discrepancy, a desire to to get curious about how much is really comes from my own psychology as opposed to really comes from them. That has to happen first. Otherwise, we're not talking about really projection. We're just talking about unconsciousness. We're just saying there's an amorphous clarity of what's really going on. But for something to be technically a projection, there's to be at least a willingness to investigate if there's a discrepancy or not. Yeah, and I'm going to talk about one method of doing this today for the second half. I guess that's pretty much the first half there. So if anybody has questions here in terms of wanting clarification or just questions in general, nothing like too personal. We won't be digging into real personal examples today. I'll be using a shared example for the second half. But if anybody has
wonderful, folks.
questions.
The rules we have the following rules. We have 4 rules. Number 1, go ahead and raise your hand in Zoom or type exclamation mark in chat in order to ask a question. Rule number 2, keep on topic. We're not going to do personal issues. We're going to do general issues. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, feel free to disagree, speak your mind, do so courteously. Okay. Next up is going to be Anna, followed by Kim. Give me just a second. Okay, let me go ahead and set this up. Yes, Anna, go ahead. Anna, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Would it be, so would you say that part of maybe recognizing a projection would be like the level of the intensity that is arising within ourselves in response to whatever the other person is doing?
Yes, that's a great distinction. So you would say that's part of the discrepancy is, and this is very hard to do, right? Because we don't, what becomes tricky is you kind of, and this is what we'll get to in the second half, but it's almost like, how do you get to a viewpoint outside of your personal experience? So it gets tricky to be able to ask the question, is my response reasonable to this scenario? It's actually a very tricky question to ask because we're going to be stuck with ourselves being the one who's reacting. But we can start to get feedback from others, outside point of view, try to get objective. And if we gain enough awareness, we can ask the question, is the intensity of my reaction basically objectively appropriate to the circumstance at hand? Because if my reaction is up here and this is the circumstance, then you could say something's going on in me to be up here about it. And by the way, invertedly too, although that's less what we're talking about today, but something quite problematic could be happening and I could be really missing the boat energetically about that. So you could say my subjective reaction to the objective scenario, and these are problematic terms, but my subjective reaction to the objective circumstance is very important, and specifically the discrepancy between the two of the emotional intensity.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Kim. Folks, if you have questions, go ahead and type !" in chat. Kim, go ahead.
Hi, Aiden. Can you hear me?
Hi, Kim. Yeah.
Hi. I was curious about positive projections, and I'm thinking of someone I used to know, like people who have trouble seeing negative in people, and if this could be like related to like not being willing to see any negative traits in themselves, sort of like enabling behavior I've seen. And then the reaction later when something becomes clear is like very dramatic because they wouldn't see it in the first place. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I can riff on that and then let me know if I'm touching on it in the way that you're hoping. Or actually, maybe tell me up front in what's would be most helpful, like because I hear your scenario and I even think I can agree with it. And I can riff off of it, but do you have a specific question? That might be my question.
Just for insight in this behavior in general. I guess that's my suspicion that that's what's going on, and I'm sort of making that correlation with what you're talking about. So I want to know if I'm projecting my own, like on that person, thinking like, oh, I don't know, everything I just said, is that my projection, or does that seem accurate, like an accurate read?
Well, I love that you're just even posing the question, am I projecting onto them? Because that's so topical for today. And it's tricky with people who are sort of like, you know, like chronically optimistic in the sense of seeing the good and missing the bad. I mean, I also have met people who I think would be in this category, and I don't necessarily have a clinical description of this, but I would say, in my experience, like I can think of actually a close friend, it's really an inability to open the door to the bad stuff because there's a real defense against what lives there. And so the world is sort of built in such a way as to keep that door closed. Usually I would think there's, you know, there's some sort of protection against bad. This is a gross generalization. I guess I'm keeping it with my friend. It's like a lot of bad, she's had some very hard times. And so keeping that in the background and focusing on the good works for her. And if you open up the door in one circumstance to the bad or the negative or the things that could be disastrous, then you could say the rest of it could flood in too. So there's some sort of impetus to stay focused on the positive, whether, in other words, subjectively, there's a reason for that. Whether or not it's objectively true in reality today as it stands, like with your friend, for example.
Okay.
Does that help?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next up is Madeline. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, Aiden. I love the way you started out with the piano keyboard. That was a great lead in.
Thank you.
It combined both the personal and the larger metaphorical aspect. What I'm wondering about is ways to address situations in which one or more of the other people involved are bringing an emotional intensity of projection that isn't really, in other words, they're projecting, they've obviously brought a lot of emotional charge to the situation, and they're not amenable to facts or any sort of looking at the larger picture and how what they're talking about might fit in. I'm thinking of a situation in a local community group I belong to. There's a small but fervent faction who are dedicated to doing something that is detrimental to the larger group, but they're so worked up about it that people just go along with it year after year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the second half might speak to this specific example, because what I'm going to give in the second half is some tools that may actually partially answer your question automatically. So maybe let's leave it for the end, because if it's still, if you still have the question at the end, it might be easier for me to address it after the tool.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so let's go to the second half.
Okay, great. So I'm going to put this website. Actually, I'm gonna give you the website with. I'll give you the main website of Byron Katie, and then the tool that we're going to be using. That's actually a link from her website. But the person we're going to be looking at is Byron Katie. I'm actually pulling up the tool here while we talk. And I discovered her actually not that long ago. And she has a wonderful tool that I'm having a little bit of trouble. Let me focus on getting this into the chat, because then I'll be, I closed all of my tabs, which means.
All right, folks, so the format is we're going to do the second part of the presentation, then we'll do some Q&A. And if we have time, we'll do breakout rooms followed by takeaways. Otherwise, we'll go directly to takeaways about what you got from this meetup. Right.
Thanks, Shrikant. I'm still grabbing this. Yeah, I apologize for the dead air here, but I think it'll be helpful to have this. Here we go. I've got it. And we can all have it available.
Great.
If you want.
So I don't need to use my backup interpreter dance routine.
Shrikant and I talked about at the beginning, approaching it through interpretive dance, but so far it seems to be working with language, which I'm relieved, because my dancing skills are not my strength. So here's her website, thework.com, and here's the sheet we're going to work from. I'll share my screen with this sheet, so it's up to you if you want to have it open on your own, or you can follow my screen. Byron Katie is an author. She's a coach, but by the way, I'm not necessarily fully subscribing to her worldview, but I do think that this tool is helpful for shadow work, and an entry point into shadow work specifically, and dealing with people that are frustrating and annoying. So her, full ideology and worldview aside, she had a sort of life experience that was very challenging, and it caused her to get quite reflective. And in the wake of that reflection, she came up with this tool, which she calls inquiry. And it basically allows us to look at our thoughts in a way that we wouldn't probably automatically, but to get kind of inquisitive and conscious about the way that we're thinking, and hopefully give ourselves some freedom from the thoughts that are weighing us down, you might say. So let me share my screen for this worksheet. So what happened was she had this kind of breakdown in her life, and had this process of starting to get very curious about her thoughts. And one at a time, she went through the thoughts that sort of caused anxiety and that were causing her distress in her life. And one by one, I mean, this was like a sort of intuitive process for her. She didn't have this exercise that I'm sharing with you, because she was sort of experiencing it in real time, but she intuitively kind of funneled her thoughts through this series of questioning, and found that on the other end of that, it really changed her life. I mean, empirically, right? Like, not as a theory, phenomenologically, empirically, her life was different as a result of this work. And so now she shares it with people, and this is all available free on her website and stuff like this. But basically what we do, we're going to use this sheet with her example of the frustrating, annoying person and the thought that's a result of the frustration. And we're going to take it through from the beginning to the end of her process, so that you have this skill set with you, and so that you can take that from this presentation. And if there's something going on in your life right now that's a recurring frustration or a very strong frustration, you can give this a shot and see if it works for you, if it gives you a little bit of resolve and perhaps some freedom energetically. So what we do is we take the thought. We're going to use her example, right? Which is this is the thought we're going to work with. I'm angry with Paul because he lied to me. Okay, that could be a thought that causes a lot of frustration, and particularly if you have the sense of an image, like we talked about an image of somebody who's always lying to me. This can be very charged to think such a thing. So this is the thought we're going to be dealing with today. I'm angry with Paul because he lied to me. And the way we deal with this is 4 questions to start. So you could take any thought. In fact, this is where the thought comes from. You say, what's the situation? Or in this situation, you take yourself. I want to start with this. It's very important that this process is not overgeneralized stuff. Like he's a liar, or he always does this, or she always does this, or you never something, right? Because now any terms like always, never, we don't have a specific situation in mind. With this exercise, it's one thought at a time, one specific situation at a time. And to do that, it's, she sort of asks us to go back into that moment. What was the moment where the thought arose and the emotion arose, and go and be in that moment. Close your eyes and get into that headspace. In this example, we're using angry with Paul, right? So if I'm the person who's having this experience, it's like I go back to the moment. Where was I? Was I sitting? Was I standing? Where was Paul? What did Paul say? What did I feel? And I give it a context, a specific time and moment. So it's always concrete. It's never general. And I think about that moment. I put my body there. I put my mind there. And I go to these 4 questions. Yeah. So Paul lied to me, right? Is it true? Yes or no? Only a 2-word answer. It's the answer is either yes or no. And then I go to the next question. Funnily enough, because we're going to enter into these types of inquiries already having a sense of what we know, we already think we know that Paul's a liar, right? So we almost have to ask ourselves again, is it true? Yes, Paul lied to me. Okay, can you absolutely know that it's true? And then I give myself some pause and think, can I absolutely know that Paul lied to me or not? If he did, sometimes, then you go from there. That's a different circumstance. If I can't absolutely know that, and I'll give you like an insider tip, it's almost never yes to absolutely know something. It is sometimes, it is, but it's in these examples she has on her podcast and on her videos and her trainings, generally it's no. I can't absolutely know that it's true. So question number 3, how do I react? Or what happens when I believe that thought, Paul lied to me? And that's where I can think, I feel angry, I feel frustrated, I want to get revenge. I think, why don't I deserve better in my life. I go down this train of thought, right? I'm a person who's angry and maybe vengeful, whatever the case may be. And who would I be without the thought? Okay, so when you take this home with you, if you do this work, you can find the situation where you go through it in the situation, time and place, who angers, confuses, hurts, saddens, or disappoints you, and why. And you fill it out. She actually makes it very clear how to fill these things out. I am, in this case, angry with Paul because he lied to me, and you'll have your own example. And essentially, I'm teaching you how to do it. I'm going through with you. But when you can print these out, these sheets, and you basically want to fill it out all the way first. Get it all out, air the laundry, fill the whole thing, go with your flow, like take the emotions and put it on the page. And then you get into the work that we're jumping into right now. So you get it all on the page as it's laid out, and you go through the questions. Is it really true? And if it's not, that's good to know. And how do I react? What happens when I do have the thought? And who would I be without it? Gives us a little window into what our life would be like if we could let go of it, or if we could not be burdened by attachment to such a thought. And what we're going to get into now is the meat of the matter for us today, because we're here on this sort of Jungian journey, this being practical Jung. So the meat of the matter for today is turning the thought around. Turning the thought around. So what we do is we basically make the statement inverse. We actually flip it. And we ask ourselves, is it as true or more true than the original way I phrased it? That's what puts us into shadow work. So if the thought is, Paul lied to me, then this is what it looks like to turn the thought around. I lied to me, right? Instead of Paul, I put myself, right? So I lied to me. Is that as true or truer than the original? And I ask myself honestly, I mean, it could be not truer, but I ask myself honestly, is that truer, or is that as true or more true than the original thought? Or, I mean, because there's many ways to flip these around, and we're going to play with this together. Or instead of Paul lied to me, I lied to Paul. Is that, think of a circumstance where that could be true. Is it as true or more true? Again, this is going to be very counterintuitive sometimes, but we're just playing with this to knock out of the thought that I'm attached to, just to knock out of the thought that I'm attached to. Another turnaround could be Paul didn't lie to me. So Paul lied to me turns into Paul didn't lie to me. Is there an example of how that could be as true or more true than the original? And those are the examples that she gives with this particular thought. So what I want to do is we're going to funnel that pattern of turning the thought around in the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet that I've sent you guys and that I have on my screen share. We're going to go through this list and we're going to see if we can flip it, just as a practicing of turning the thought around. We're going to take this example of I'm angry with Paul because he lied to me, and we're going to flip it in each question. There's the wants, there's the advice, there's the needs, there's the complaints, and we're going to try to practice getting a flipping the thought around literacy. So when you take this with you, if you end up doing some shadow work with this, you'll have some experience seeing what it looks like to flip it around with material that's not personal to you, for example. So I wonder if there's a way to, yeah, I'm going to stop the screen share because I want to see the chat. So in the next category of the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet, it's about wants. So
Aiden,
yeah.
You want to be sharing the screen and seeing the chat at the same time?
Well,
Is that your preferred way of doing this?
I guess that probably would be. That's a
Okay,
good
so
idea.
you share, go ahead and share the screen, and I'll show you how to look at the chat. At the top of the screen, if you just move your mouse up, you will see some dots or more or something, and that's where the chat is.
I'm there. Thanks, Shrikant. So this way you can see the screen too, and I'll have the chat available so I can see it. So so we'll
just
go to
one last thing, folks. You have a way of changing the settings so you can make the screen as large as you want. You can go ahead and choose, click on the right top corner on view, and you can change it to side-by-side speaker, and then you can move the slider to make the slides bigger. Or if you want Aiden to be bigger on the screen, you can choose, but you can choose one or the other. It's going to be a trade-off. Go ahead.
Thanks, Shrikant. So this is the part that's interactive, and I'll be excited to explore this part with all of you. It will just take place in the chat with this. But what we want to do is go question by question and look at the statement that was made as the example and see if we can turn the thought around. So the next thought is the wants. When you fill this out on your form yourself, it'll be, how do you want the person to change, or what do you want them to do? So in this case, the example is, I want Paul to see that he is wrong. I want him to stop lying to me. So let's start with the first sentence. Given the small example that we did already, I know this is a new kind of exploration, but given that example we've done already, can you see how you might turn this thought around? I want Paul to see that he is wrong, and just go ahead and put it in the chat. There will probably be at least 3 turnarounds like there were for the initial example. And if you feel moved with the second sentence to try to turn that one around, feel free to play with that one too. I want to see that I am wrong. Well, that's an interesting turnaround. Yep, I want. And it's almost like what's interesting about that is we then we leave Paul out of the equation, right? So could be true. It could be true. I also wonder if there's a way to say it where Paul is in it, where Paul is in it. I want Paul to stop lying. Yep, Anna, that's right. And that's how she's framing it in this example, right? I want him to stop lying. So how would you say, Anna, using your example, how would you flip that around? I want Paul to stop lying. To turn it into its opposite, how would you flip that around? We'll leave a little space here while people are typing in, and then as we get the flow going, I think we'll kind of get in a flow here with trying out of this. I want to stop lying. I want to stop lying. I want Paul to keep lying to me. I want to stop lying to Paul. These are great. I want to stop lying. I want Paul to keep lying to me. Yep. And you know, along with these, one that I saw is I don't want Paul to stop lying. I want Paul to tell the truth. Yep. I think I want to stop lying to is an interesting way to look at that. So then you can ask in this scenario, and it would have to be pertinent to your own life, right? But is it true, right? Give an example of where it's true, where I would want to stop lying. Or you could say, I think Katie, I think she would point out here, yeah, I don't want Paul to stop lying, because that's the most direct opposite, right? I want him to do this. I don't want him to do this. Is there a way to think of an example of where that would be as true or truer? I don't want him to do this thing that I'm initially thinking I definitively do want him to do this thing. But all these examples are good. These examples are good. So let's go back to the first sentence. I want Paul to see that he is wrong. How could we turn that around? We had one at the top, I think, from Meredith. I want to see that I am, yeah. And Paul to see that he is right. That's a turnaround. And then you have to ask the question, if is it true? In what way is he right? You see, that's how we play with this. If you want him to see that it's right, in what ways is his quote unquote lie right? We have to play with that and see if it's as true or not as true. I don't want Paul to see that he is wrong. Yeah. So that would be my first impulse too, Joseph. So then you could say, give an example of not wanting Paul to see that he is wrong, and play with that and see if it's at least as true or more true than the other. I want Paul to see that he is wrong. I want Paul to see that I am wrong. That's what Meredith was sort of, I think, touching on, but that's probably how I would, I'm sorry, Kim, not Meredith, Kim. That's what Kim was touching on, but how I might say it is, I want Paul to see that I am wrong. How is that true? Is there a place here where I am being wrong? And how can I shine the light on that and present it? I want Paul not to see that he's wrong. I want Paul to see that I am wrong. I don't want Paul to see that he's wrong. There's a few that I could see for that. Let's go to the next one. Paul wants to see that I am wrong. Well, that might be true, but the tricky thing is part of all this process is taking it into ourselves. So if it becomes about what Paul wants to see, we can't live in that world necessarily. It's turning it into what I'm seeing and how to live in that kind of space. let's go to the next one. So when you fill this out, you would say the advice. What advice would you offer to the other person? So the example that she gives is, Paul shouldn't frighten me with his behavior. He should take a deep breath. So here's for somebody who yells. Paul shouldn't frighten me with his behavior. He should take a deep breath. So this is going to be potentially triggering. I don't know but there are ways to turn this around. You could say, I'll just throw one here. We'll kind of jump to the next one. I think we could say, I shouldn't frighten me with his behavior. There's a few actually turnarounds here, but they're all in an advanced category in the sense of none of this is about victim blaming. I guess I want to say that at this point, because there may be circumstances that are really pushing the boundaries of appropriateness. But what we're trying to do with this work is to say, how much can I be in the category of questioning my own thinking and getting really clear how my mind is operating in this circumstance? At the end of the day, it may be, for example, like that I end a relationship or I leave a circumstance that's toxic, but the idea is that it's done with an awareness that there's an inquiry about my thoughts about it. She does a really magnificent job of doing even very challenging sentences. If you listen to her podcast, you'll see some of that. So let's go to needs. To be happy, you would need the other person to say, feel, or do what? So I need Paul to stop talking over me. I need him to really listen to me. Do you all see any turnarounds in either of those sentences? Now the sheet is so you can see the examples of turnarounds with the Paul lied to me. You can see these turnarounds, how they're used in form. And if you see any of them applying to the needs. Yeah, I like that, Yosef. I need to listen to Paul. Here's an interesting turnaround. Let's keep playing with that sentence, okay? I need him to really listen to me. I need to listen to Paul. What other turnarounds are there? Start the sentence with I. Meredith, yeah, I see that. Yeah, that would be a reverse. Don't need him to really take some of the, it extracts some of the force of needing such a thing, if you can kind of give an example of how you don't actually need that. And I wonder with this second sentence, does anybody see another turnaround? If it starts with I need blank to really listen to me. I need blank to really listen to me. We have so far, I need him to really listen to me, and I need to listen to him. Yeah, Elodie. Nice. I need me to really listen to me. Wonderful turnaround, right? We wouldn't necessarily see that automatically if we're talking about, we're so pissed at Paul and he's not listening and that's where my energy is going. Then I think, the natural thing is to think he needs to listen to me. But this turnaround is actually quite powerful. I need to listen to me. Is that as true or more true? Give an example. What does it look like when I'm really listening to me in this situation? That's a very potent turnaround. I feel actually that's kind of a nice landing point. And again, it puts it in this frame where I am empowered in a situation where my state of being was previously tied to somebody else doing something. And here, now it's turned to the scene where I need to listen to me. What does the world look like when I'm really listening to me and what I'm needing? And coming out of that place is quite different. Feel free to keep adding to that one, but I'm going to jump to the next one. This one's very real shadow work. This is where we really get into the shadow work, where we say, what do we think of the other person in this situation, and make a list. And it's okay to be judgmental, or even what you might describe as petty. So name is blank, 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 and you just let it out. And then when you turn that around, I mean, all you really have to do is say, I am blank, 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 and see, like, in other words, it's a direct link to a projection withdrawal, at least possibly. If you can say, okay, Paul is a liar. Okay, I am a liar. Okay, where's a time? Give me an example of where that's true. When have I lied recently? And see if I can come up with something. Paul is arrogant. Okay, give an example recently where I may have expressed myself as arrogant, or loud, dishonest, unconscious. And just see if there's an example, because it takes some of the sting out of that. The power of arrogance and loudness and dishonesty is all in the other person. Then I can't do anything about it. But if I can see where maybe I have some of the same potentials or capacities, there's a link in our relationship, because I could say there's a sense of understanding. I may not want to do that. Maybe I want to work on my lying. Maybe I want to work on my loudness. Maybe I want to work on my dishonesty, but I can work on it. It's up to Paul if he works on it. So in this way, I get to take some of that energy back and work on it in myself, instead of trying to convince Paul to be this person that I want him to be. I can turn myself into the person that I want to be, ideally, or at least work on it. And you find often the things that annoy you about other people, again, we go back to the shadow definition. It makes shadow projections make the world into our unknown face. So if I quickly have words at the tip of my tongue about what really annoys me about another person, there's a chance, at least, that I can learn about myself in that list of words. And then the sixth part is, I don't ever want the person to do such a thing, right? So in this case, I don't ever want Paul to lie to me, and I don't ever want to be disrespected again. This is another powerful turnaround. In this one, we just switch it to say, I am willing to be lied to by Paul again, and I look forward to Paul lying to me again. It's just playing with the emotional wallop. It's not to say that it's you have to necessarily be entirely full-hearted about it, but we play with it and say, okay, I'm willing for this to happen again. Am I really willing for this to happen again? And what does it do for me emotionally if I imagine being in that space, instead of the way that my thought is creating my emotional reality right now about it? To say I'm willing about something would be a completely different perspective. So you just play with that to knock yourself out of the current frustration, annoyance. So there's a tool. She has a podcast, if you search on Spotify, Byron Katie, or she's got books or whatever, but this worksheet is in the chat now. I'll put it in one more time because the chat's gone on a while here. And you can do this worksheet, and people swear by this. I have some friends in the coaching world, or even people I respect in the coaching world, that come back to this regularly when they get caught in a thought loop, to try to just at least untangle themselves from it. And it's probably one of the best shadow examples. I'll give you my personal, I'm trying to think if I should give a personal example. What I will say is, I have done work similar to this, where my projection onto another being was really about me. That is really, so this is not theoretical for me. That's happened to me in such a way as I realize, oh my gosh, I'm hating in this other person something about myself. And I have to hate it in them because I'm not able to contain it in myself yet. And once I realized that, it's to be able to bring it into myself and say, what are these characteristics about myself that I'm so disconnected from that I have to project them onto other people? And that's shadow work in a nutshell. And this is one tool that at least opens the door to that. So that's what I've got. I'll be curious if there's any questions, or Shrikant.
You know what? Let's do one thing. I have some general questions about the tool itself.
Mhm.
and about this technique, because this is really, really fascinating. So I have a couple of questions just about why it works. So what exactly are you doing? Because it's really powerful the way you flip the questions. So
Mhm.
why is the flipping of questions so effective? Why does this flipping work?
Well, I think my initial response, which is not particularly technical, is that many of these types of pursuits in terms of the psychological differentiation and Jungian thought is making a clear distinction between I and thou. You see, that there is a clear, and oftentimes where we run into to some problems is when that distinction is not clear, that the you and I is kind of a soup. So we kind of exist in this state of Shrikant Aidenness, and we don't know where you end and where I begin. So when you do a question like this, you force yourself to say, where do I end and where does the other person begin? Because I like to attribute certain things to you and attribute certain things to me. This is the whole good guy, bad guy psychology. Like if I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy. I get to feel like the good guy, and I get to feel you're the bad guy, and I don't have to own any parts of me that might be bad guy parts because I'll just project it onto you. So this flip immediately causes a person to break that spell and kind of say, well, if I'm on the other side of the equation, is it also possibly true?
Right. The other thing that I see is this is a very powerful tool against confirmation bias, because you have a certain view of yourself and you're just going by it. Just by asking the question, just by flipping it, it's a way of challenging whatever confirmation biases you have.
That's so true. And it's such a great point, because oftentimes confirmation biases can hide a certain defense, right? It's sort of like we want to continue to believe that it's true, and we don't want to be questioned about it, and we want you to believe that it's true, and all these things. So the idea of digging in and actually having inquiry about it takes a sort of humility that is not always natural.
The last thing is that it seems to be a way of brainstorming possible shape of the problem as well, because by doing all these flips, many of which may not actually work, you say, no, that's actually not true, but you're kind of looking at everything around it instead of being fixated, okay, this is the problem and this is the solution. You're actually saying, oh, the problem may be like this and the solution may be like that. So it's a great way of brainstorming around a problem.
Love that. That's a great point.
Excellent. Let's go for questions, folks. It's time for questions. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you have questions. Next, give me just a second. Next up is Flora. Flora, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So I just want to make sure I understand this. So is it that once we recognize the behavior in ourselves, we can then choose which, it's all like, there's that story of, well, if you've got two dogs fighting each other, which one wins, and they're both equally matched, which one wins is the one you feed. And it's like, if we recognize the wolf in ourselves, or the bad dog in ourselves, then we can consciously choose not to feed that dog. Is that like when we're projecting the bad dog onto the other person? Is that, I just want to make sure I get this, because I could see situations where I recognize, or someone else recognizes a behavior that's unsavory, that I'm capable of.
Well, even that alone, right? Like just the acknowledgement of capability immediately kind of lessens the pressure. So it's almost like when I can't imagine myself doing something, then I'm the most dangerous. So to even just be able to say, but I can imagine myself doing it, is one notch down from like a full-blown projection per se, because at that point you can have a real connection to the other person who's doing the unsavory behavior. It's not to say that it's okay. It's not to say you condone it. It's not, it's not to say there's no morals, but it's to say if you recognize in yourself the capacity to do such an unsavory thing, it takes some of the sting out of it, because you can say, well, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I could see myself doing that too. And now we're in a world in which there's the capacity for compassion, for empathy, for genuine connection in a scenario that if I had said, oh, that's like disgusting, I can't believe you would do that, I would never do that, it's impossible for me to do such a thing. Where's the bridge?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Laura.
Wonderful. Does anybody else have questions? Otherwise, what we can do is that let's do breakout rooms for 20 minutes, and then we can come back for questions. So in the breakout rooms, we have the following rules. Rule number 1, let everybody talk for 1 to 2 minutes on what they have learned from the meetup so far, put whatever they want on the table, and then begin the discussion. During the discussion, keep on topic, be brief, be courteous, and encourage other people to speak. If you wish, you can leave the breakout room anytime and return to the main room. Starting the breakout rooms now. All right, folks, welcome back. Welcome back. All right, so it's now time for Q&As or takeaways. You're welcome to ask more questions, or you're welcome to talk about what you got from this meetup. Either way, go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat to ask your best question or to give your takeaways, or both. Or you can raise your hand in Zoom. Again, keep on topic, be brief, and be courteous. Any questions or comments or takeaways? All right.
I was going to add to that too, or if there's any requests in terms of the material that was covered or related. Oh, there's a question coming in, but you could also think if there's a request as another option.
Sure, excellent. Next up is Jean. Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, I was late for the lecture.
Sorry, Jean, you can't say repeat the lecture.
No. But this topic I'm quite fascinated.
Go
But
ahead.
in our group, we are talking about, there's another aspect, it's a culture difference, where that may also create some kind of conflict, annoyance, but some is intentionally. Like we're talking about, I encountered some client who take advantage of people, like the new immigrant, they're investing a lot of your time, ask different questions, and it's not very, So I was complaining about that, and then we're talking about how the new immigrant, they still behavior like they're in the old environment. That's actually especially special situation in American, and also because there's so many different cultures. People, I found the reason a lot of people hang out with there's the same group because there's less misunderstanding. I have friends from different country, a French friend. I found because of culture difference, sometimes there's misunderstanding. It's much harder, to deal with socially. So I wonder that may create misunderstanding, annoyance because of culture difference, which is it's a big problem in America, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's another factor also. Yeah, because the expectations or cultural norms can be different. And having awareness of that, I could see as something that it belongs in this whole conversation, and to have an awareness of that factor as well.
Okay, I'm now that there aren't that many questions, I'm going to use the opportunity to ask you questions, Aiden. I always have questions for you. So
Okay.
let's talk about, there are some of the people who are going to be relatively new to Jung's concept. And in any case, Jung's concepts are very deep and worth revisiting again and again. What exactly is a shadow, and how does that work in a person?
So, Jung's point is that we all have a shadow, and that it's a fact by virtue of our humanness, and so that there's this Jungian idea: the brighter the light, the longer the shadow, and the general premise is that I'm going to be a little bit abstract at first, and then I'll try to pedal back into this question. It's like when something becomes very one-sided, it casts the unconscious goes the other direction. So, for example, the way my mentor talks about this is the law of compensation, I guess I'll say. So in the psyche, we have, quote unquote, this law of compensation, just like homeostasis, like in nature. It's psyche has a dimension of nature as well. So you say, if the psyche goes too far in one direction, then there's going to be a compensation. So often we consciously, for example, this is the whole theory of types too, and all these kinds of things. As we get very focused and our conscious attention develops in a very specific way, that by virtue of that movement and that attention, it casts a certain shadow psychologically that is totally antithetical to where we think we're headed. So in other words, if I spend my whole life learning about goodness and focusing on goodness and how I can be a good person and what it means to be good, and I'm going to be good and I'm going to be better and I'm going to be good, and I try to shut out more and more what could be bad about me, what happens is on the other side of all of that goodness for my self-identification, behind me in my back is a long trail of badness that I've left behind. And it's the Jungian principle of compensation that says it will come back to haunt me. These parts of us that we don't focus on with our conscious attention, it's not that they just disappear. Like if I want to develop my thought very strong, or if I want to be very good, or if I want to be, the list goes on. It's sort of like, I want to be a very spiritual person. I want to have nothing to do with material matters. I want to be all spiritual. It's like any way that we focus our attention, it's not that things outside of those parameters disappear in our personality. It's just that they find their place in our shadow.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Now, let me ask you a follow-up question. So you've identified what happens, and this happens for everybody because everybody will be focused on something or the other. What in principle Jung suggests is a solution to it? What do you do with your shadow to be more of a whole person, to kind of integrate our personality? What does he recommend?
That's a good question. I think the main tool that I've become aware of, sort of in the field of analytical psychology, is dream work. And the reason that's the first thing I think of, because Jung talks about it a lot, and it's unadulterated by the conscious mind. When we have a dream, we can't, it comes through at a time when our conscious mind is sort of dissipated, it's kind of lowered. So the information that comes up in our dreams, it comes from the unconscious and doesn't get filtered as much through our waking life mind. So, the Jungian idea is we're dreaming all the time, not just at night, but because we have directed thought, like we talked about directed thinking the other week, because we have directed thinking, we have high levels of sort of rationality and conscious development. The noise of our consciousness is so loud, we barely hear the unconscious in the background. It's a sort of quiet thing. So in dreams, the situation changes. Consciousness quiets, and suddenly, the unconscious kind of is more in the driver's seat, and we get to really be with it. So dreams are a wonderful way to be in this landscape of the unconscious and to come to terms with it. But we also have relationships like we talked about today. Situations that annoy us is a very good one. And, Jung was kind of famous for not having formulaic answers to things, a lot of heuristics perhaps, but no real formulaic stuff. So it's a very good question and very hard to answer how each person does it. Yeah.
Excellent. So that's a good start. Folks, we give priority to people who have not asked the questions before. So it's going to be Brad followed by Madeline. And go ahead and type exclamation mark to line up for questions. Brad, go ahead. Brad, you need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Yeah, I have another.
Brad, could you speak into the mic? We can barely hear you. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. Is this any better?
No, you just move the mic right next to your mouth. Yeah.
How good?
No, I think it might be. It's possible that your computer mic is the one that's picking your sound up because it sounds very far away. You might want to lean into your computer. Is that possible?
No, it's a nice movie.
Okay. How about you experiment with this while Madeline asks a question, and then we'll come back. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes, my question is very much in line with what you raised, Shrikant, about the shadow, and also what Aiden just spoke about. I guess it's about ways to create an integrated narrative of our lives, because it seems to me that the approach of Byron Katie is about integrating our shadow side more, because in life there's sort of the larger question of, do we keep encountering the same external archetypes over and over again? The same kinds of difficult people, the same kinds of difficult situations, not because we're creating them, but because we are participating in some sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, oppositional archetype, or
There are conversations about this idea. Were you going to say more, Madeline?
no, it's I think you probably got the gist from my rambling.
It's tricky because, you know, as is often the case when we dig into this kind of material, it comes up the delineation between inner and outer life, you know, and how do we conceive of the relationship between the two, you know, where you know, you kind of say if we see patterns over and over in outer life, how much does that correspond with something that's meaningfully inner, and how much is not meaningfully inner? It's just an outer chance, you know. I mean, Jung makes this distinction between chance and synchronicity. So you could say if statistically something's happened over and over again by chance, that is possible, you know. But on the other hand, is there an inner dimension? Is something being constellated, right, based on inner material, or what Jung would call psychic material from the psyche? And there are conversations about this. You know, I've heard several people talk about even like intergenerational stuff that gets played out in one's life. And you could ask the question, is it environmental only? Is it intergenerational? People talk about karma. I mean, I don't have the answer as to what constellates something in the outer world. I think in terms of patterns and such things, or archetypal patterns, but I think awareness of the fact that something could potentially be categorized as an archetypal pattern, and an investigation of that possibility as one's lot in life, so to speak, could lead to sort of a fruitful enterprise. But as always with this stuff, I tend to at the end say that it really is a matter of the individual, how they encounter that pattern and the meaning that they experience out of it. Because Jung was quick to say, you know, one of the big mistakes is that we assume that something's subjectively very important to us, very big life lesson, very big life experience. So we say because something's very important to us, we assume that everybody else would think so, or that everybody else will be able to deeply share that important thing that we have experienced. Like a, you know, I don't know, I'm drawing a blank, but you can think of any big pivotal experience in your life that feels paramount. You could say, not everybody's going to have that same entry point into what meaningful experiences are, or what really matters. But analogously, we all do have meaningful things. We all do have big experiences. So at least by analogy, we can say, you know, my version of Jungian analysis is your version of AA, or my version of Jungian analysis is your version of Christianity, or my version of Jungian analysis is your version of being in nature. And in some level, if it's spiritually true for you and it's spiritually true for me, analogously we can be together. But the mistake would be, I'm so moved by Jungian psychology and my experience that everybody else should be as moved and everybody else should learn the same lessons in the same way. I have found, well, the Jungian idea is one could set oneself up for disappointment with that, because each of us has to find our own very meaningful way of processing things. So I'm kind of dancing around your question, but I think that it's an individual question, and you could say, how does such pattern get constellated? And then you'd really have to wrestle with that.
Sorry, next up is going to be Brad, followed by Elena. Brad.
How's the audio now?
Perfect.
Good?
Better.
Okay. Yes, sometimes, geez, where was I? I lost my thought.
That's fine. If you come back, if you find it again,
Yeah.
go ahead and type exclamation mark.
Yeah.
Next up is Elena.
Did you want to ask it live, Elena?
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like my sometimes I can distinguish between archetypes and shadowed people, and sometimes I think my archetypes over time, over years, turn into shadow people in my dreams. Can it be real, or am I confused? Or I probably don't have knowledge of it. So can archetypes turn over years into shadows?
Mm.
And how can I distinguish between what is an archetype in a dream and what is a shadow?
I'm going to give you my answer to this, and you could live with it, because this is how I think about this now. People get very confused with shadow, anonymous, self. I mean, because I think Jung meant very specific things by these terms, but actually they're confusing, first off. And second of all, they're based on having an experience with them. So again, that points to the individual encounter. It's hard to sort of create a roadmap that works for everybody. But he is talking about specific territory with each of these concepts. For my own simplicity, here's how I look at this. When I encounter images in a dream, the closer they are to my human form as they're represented, the closer they are to my consciousness. And the further they are from my human form, the further they are from my consciousness, which is to say they become more archetypal. So in my case, as a cisgender heteronormative man, if I run into my dream, if I have a male figure that is looks kind of shadowy, I could say, well, that's because why I'm saying this is that the shadow is the first encounter of the unconscious. So if you think about, here's the ego, and this is the unconscious, you could say, here's, part of the ego is conscious and part of it's unconscious. And as you go, you encounter like shadow stuff, and then you encounter, syzygy, like anonymous stuff, and then you encounter self stuff. And it's sort of like the further you go, things are represented less and less like your conscious egoic form. So as soon as you get into, you could go from like male shadow figures for me to female figures to animal figures to geometric figures to non-living, right? So to the stars and the sun, and now I'm out in very archetypal material. If I have a dream about the moon, that's very different than my lived life as a man. So the further it gets away from my lived experience, the more archetypal it is. That's how I think about it.
Thank you. I'm going to put a link in the chat for about 20 odd videos that we did on Jung on all these concepts. We had like number of Jungian analysts come and talk about each of these concepts in detail. So go ahead and check them out. That's a good, very good source. Next up is Brad. Brad, go ahead.
Okay, so I had a thought about shadow. There's a saying, what you focus on flourishes. So consequently, if you develop different aspects of yourself to survive in the world, to grow, to be productive, to form relationships and stuff, all the stuff that you didn't focus on isn't flourishing because you're focusing on other things. And so all that stuff that's potential about what you're capable of becoming is your shadow. It's been left behind. All the stuff that one has repressed, suppressed down, has particular distaste for in oneself, that all becomes shadow. Also, the other thing I wanted to mention was reality is a huge distraction from dialoguing with the unconscious. It's great at that. And sometimes we will construct all sorts of systems so we don't have to do that dialogue work.
I found that to be true.
Yeah, gets us into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
All right, folks. So I sent you the wrong playlist, and there is almost 30 videos now on Jung, not 20. Sorry about that. And this is the right list. All right, wonderful, folks. So this was great, and Aiden is going to be back every second Sunday at 5 p.m. So it'll be about a month from now, and we'll go ahead and announce the topic. Aiden, you have not picked the topic yet, right?
Oh, no, I've been focused on
Okay,
this move.
that's fine.
So
That's
to be
fine.
continued.
That's fine. We will go ahead. Don't worry. All Aiden's topics are fantastic. So it's going to be better than expected. And his delivery is actually one step above that. So it's always going to be fun. All right, folks. So Aiden, can you go ahead and put your website in the chat?
Yes, I'm going to put my website here. Thank you for that reminder. You'll see the work that I do as a coach. I generally work with artists, performers, and creatives because that's my background. But you can see also a little bit about me. And you know what I'm also going to put in is my Jung Facebook group. In fact, if you just go onto Facebook and you search for Jung School, I'm trying to build a community, a reliable, supportive community to further the conversation about Jung and to be interactive with it. So there's a little bit of promotion from me. Thanks to all of you for coming. I really always appreciate it, and the very deep and wonderful questions and participation. And thanks, Shrikant, for hosting.
Well, thank you very much, Aiden. Always delighted to have you here. See you, everybody. Bye.